Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this evening. I'm so happy to be able to bring to you all the 2024 David H. Miller Memorial Lecture, which is a lecture that we look forward to every year. Before we proceed, I'd like to say a thank you to all of our co-sponsors who have helped promote and make this event more well-known across their different constituencies. The Elliott School's Institute for African Studies and several student groups, including the Delta Phi Epsilon Professional Foreign Service Fraternity, the Onero Institute, and Young Black Professionals in International Affairs. As always, we appreciate your collaboration and the strong student turnout tonight. Now, for those of you who don't know, this memorial lecture is named for David H. Miller, a distinguished GW alumnus who dedicated most of his professional life to engagement with Africa. Following his passing in 2004, David's family, friends, and fellow alumni established the David H. Miller Endowment for African Studies at the Elliott School in furtherance of his vision of U.S.-Africa engagement. Tonight, we're delighted to welcome several of David's family and friends for this event. His widow, Kyung Cho Miller, their children, Max and Audrey, David's sister, Anne, and her husband, Bernard, as well as friends Mark Brown and his family, Tim Medina and Rich Mead. Welcome and thank you for joining us again on campus. Now, as some of you know, David was a very early and energetic optimist on Africa's business prospects. After time that he served at USAID and at OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, early in his career, he helped found the Corporate Council on Africa in 1993, serving as its first president and CEO. Under his leadership, the council grew in just a few years from an organization with no staff and 6 corporate members to an organization with 200 member companies, 14 full-time employees, and an annual budget of $3 million. Today, the Corporate Council continues to thrive, and it remains the leading U.S. business association focused solely on connecting business interests in Africa. Its flagship event is the U.S.-Africa Business Summit, which brings together heads of state, U.S. and African government officials, international investors, and business leaders. This year's summit begins next week, so it's a very busy time, and we are very honored to welcome as tonight's keynote speaker, the current president and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, Florizelle Liser. Flori, we are delighted to welcome you tonight. And as I think you all have heard, this is a coming full circle. It's 20 years since David's passing. It is 30 years since the founding of the Corporate Council on Africa. So tonight's lecture is particularly meaningful and symbolic in that way. Now I will introduce Ms. Liser. Flori Liser joined the Corporate Council on Africa in 2017 from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where she was the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa from 2003 forward. So she really knows this space. At USTR, she led trade and investment policy toward 49 sub-Saharan African nations and oversaw implementation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, widely considered a cornerstone of U.S. economic engagement in Africa. In addition to her time at USTR, Ms. Liser has worked in the U.S. Department of Transportation, and she served as an associate fellow at the Overseas Development Council. She holds an MA in International Economics from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, and a BA in International Relations and Political Science from Dickinson College. Following her remarks, Ms. Liser will join Professor Jennifer Cook, Director of the Elliott School's Institute for African Studies and Director of the Masters of International Policy and Practice program, an accelerated MA program for mid-career professionals. Professor Cook joined GW after 18 years at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where she served as Africa Program Director. I now welcome Ms. Liser to the podium for her opening remarks, and we look forward to all that we will learn from you tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I knew that when I received this invitation, and it's such an honor, I thought, oh my goodness, this is like a few days before I have to leave and go to Dallas, Texas for our CCA US Africa Business Summit. And I said, and the answer is yes, I'm going to be here. So thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor. You know, just to think about it for me, you know, just thinking about David Miller, and those who founded CCA, they were really true visionaries. They understood the immense potential of partnerships between the US and the African private sectors, and that important role that they could play in the economic development and prosperity of both the United States and African nations. It's also, I think, important being here for the annual David H. Miller Africa Lecture this year to really think about the importance of graduate programs like that at the GWU Elliott School of International Affairs, whose mission is to develop the talent that will, in the coming years, be the core of leadership on international and global affairs, not just in the United States, but in Africa and other countries around the world. The David H. Miller Memorial Africa Lecture Series that I am honored to speak at this evening is really a fitting way to honor David, not just because he attended GW, not just because he founded the Corporate Council on Africa, or because he was a visionary about the promise of Africa, but because of the students, those here tonight, who will shape the future political, economic, and social landscape in the US and Africa. And events like this lecture serve as poignant reminders of the importance of nurturing talent and fostering dialogue between nations. We are especially privileged at Corporate Council on Africa all these many years later to still be fostering and promoting the dream and the vision that David had way back then, even before he helped to establish Corporate Council on Africa in 1993. We continue to serve both US and African companies, both multinationals as well as SMEs. I don't think that there are very many other business associations in the US that can say that they serve that particular group, bringing all of them together. And that's important for a lot of reasons. One of them is because we have to understand the importance of Africa. It was important then when David established CCA, but it's even more important now. There are very few issues in the world that can be resolved without the engagement of and focus on the continent of Africa. If you're thinking about climate change, if you're thinking about addressing sustainable development, if you are thinking about educating women and youth, if you're thinking about promoting entrepreneurship, if you're thinking about new technologies, if you are thinking about making this world a better place, you really cannot do it without Africa. You've got to focus on that continent. It's 1.3 billion people, and all the youth that are there. Because without doing that, we will fail at all those things. We will not, as a global community and family, be able to resolve any of those issues without first saying, in my opinion, and sitting down with Africans, not to tell them what to do about those issues, but to invite them as partners who also want to work on those core issues as well. And so I want to just turn to and share a little bit about when I first learned that trade was so important. I was really a development person. That was my thing, development. And I think it was mentioned, I worked at the Overseas Development Council. So when I left SAIS in 1975, yes, I did say 1975, I went to work at the Overseas Development Council, and I was just really delighted to be there. And I kept focusing on what can we do to support economic development, in all emerging markets, but my interest was Africa. That's the area I had focused on while at SAIS. And early along, I started to read more about Africa's situation with regard to trade, not realizing that the two things were really linked. And I think there are people today that still don't realize it. Africa today still accounts for less than 3% of all global trade, despite all its riches, not just the human resources and the people, but the gold, the coltan, the lithium for batteries, all of the land that could, if used properly, feed people. That's another issue. If you want food security in the world, you have to think about Africa. And I read a book back then that really, I don't know that I would say it changed my life, but it changed the way that I thought about Africa, because the focus at that time, like me, was on development assistance. How much aid can we get to Africans to help them, feed their people and address diseases and educate their children and, all these things. And I thought we had a really noble cause. And then I read this book that said that if Africa were able at that time to increase its share of world trade by just 1 percentage point, going from at the time about 1% of world trade to 2% of world trade at that time. Mind you, there's still less than 3% today, but I'll talk more about that. But if they were able to increase their share of world trade just 1 percentage point at that time, it would have been equivalent to more than 3 times all the development assistance that Africa got from everybody in the world. I said, oh my goodness, wait a minute. You mean that like just 1 percentage point of additional trade, products that they can sell to the world, services that they can sell to the world, would be 3 times better than all the aid that everybody was sending them from everywhere. And that's when I realized that trade was the thing that Africa needed. It wasn't that we shouldn't provide aid. Of course, you have to provide development assistance. It has to be the safety net, right? The thing that you are able to do when people have disasters or when there's an outbreak of something, or just specific needs that you want to address. But trade was the thing that was going to be able to give Africa a real advantage and a sustainable advantage, and provide economic development that nobody would be able to take away. They wouldn't be sitting there with their hands out waiting to get, development assistance from this country, that country, or another country. They would be making for themselves the resources and the revenue, generating the resources and the revenue that they needed, using their own wealth, their own products, their own services. And that's when I became a trade and development junkie. I realized that, we wanted to shift. We weren't doing a great job of it then, but we wanted to shift from thinking of Africa as a place that needed aid to thinking of Africa and working with Africa as a place that needed to develop its products. Now, I shared with you that back then they were about 1% of world trade. And today they're a little less than 3% of world trade. It's been tough for them since COVID, but they're recovering now. And what's the reason for that? Why is it that the Africans, with all that they have, are accounting for so little of global trade? And the reason is this: all the products they're shipping out, most of the products they're shipping out today, are shipped out as natural resources and commodities. They're not processed. There's no value addition or beneficiation, as the Africans talk about. So, if you think about, every product, if they ship out cotton, they import clothing. They ship out, copper as a raw material, they import copper tubing and piping. They ship out their lithium, it comes back to them as batteries. They ship out, just name it, whatever it is, They ship it out, it goes somewhere else. Those people get the investment in manufacturing. Those people create the jobs in those other places. And then they ship those products to everybody else in the world. So they end up capturing in every value chain, other people are capturing the majority of the value of what Africa has. If you look at cocoa, you know, in the value chain that includes chocolate, cocoa, which there aren't a lot of places in the world that produce it, you know, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, right? They get, you know, a very small percentage of it. You know, coffee, you know, goes out as raw beans. It's you know, processed in other places. And then, you know, we go to Starbucks or wherever you buy your coffee from. I'm a tea drinker, but same thing. And we pay $3 for a cup. Okay. And then if you look at what did they get for, you know, a kilo of beans, right? And you realize every single value chain is like that. One of the things, and people have heard me say this before, but one of the ones that really just gets in my craw is cashews. There are cashews all over the continent, but the majority of Africa's cashews are shipped to Vietnam, where they get processed. So now you think of it, you're in West Africa, you've got cashews all in that lump right there, you know, but there's also down in Mozambique, there are other places that there are cashews, Tanzania and East Africa. But just think about it. You take it from there and you ship it to South Asia, all the way to South Asia, right? And then they process the cashews, okay? And then they ship it out to the rest of the world. And when I've asked people, why would that make any sense? You know, the transportation costs, I mean, that makes no sense. And people would say, oh, but the cost of processing cashews in Africa is so expensive. So then I started asking people, well, how did Vietnam, it used to be India, but I said, how did Vietnam get to have a cashew processing industry? What happened for them? And there were investments that were made into Vietnam in cashew processing. Now they have tens of thousands of workers in those factories. And guess what? They depend on African cashews. Now, and this is probably a bit controversial, but I'm going to put it out there. There are folks who have a vested interest in making sure that Africa's cashews continue to be shipped raw from Africa to Vietnam, and there are a few other places as well, but it's largely Vietnam these days because they've invested in that. They've invested in those factories, and you know, their profits come from that. They get much less of a profit from the raw cashews. It's the value addition that makes it really profitable for them. So, you know, we have for years through the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which was established back in 2000, which allows Africans to ship their products to the US duty free. So most African products can come to US duty free. And that was one of the reasons why I loved working on AGOA, because it was, in my view, the best way to help Africa to move from raw commodities and shipping them out that way to shipping value-added products to the US, textiles and apparel, footwear, value-added agricultural products, light manufacturing, whatever it is, right? And be able to ship it into the US market duty-free. And there are people today who will tell you that, well, AGOA has not been as successful as they thought it should be or could be. And I would agree with that. But here's where I disagree. They will tell you, oh, it's only affected a handful of countries in a few product lines. I can tell you, I can show you on my iPad. I have visited many, many factories across Africa, many factories. Some of them only have 50 people, mostly women, mostly youth, right? who are producing products and sending them to the US under AGOA. Their lives have changed. So when you look at the numbers, right, when you look at the AGOA numbers, they may look really small, but if, like the factory I visited in a country where they were making one shipment of jams and jellies to Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, just one container a month. That was all they could do. But that has changed the lives of those women. People would tell me, I have school fees for my children, including the girls. I was able to put a roof on my house. You know, I was able to pay for some health care for my mother or my father. And so even though when we look at the numbers, we're such a huge economy, and you see, oh, somebody shipped us, you know, $10 million worth of something, and we dismiss it. We think, "Psh, I mean, like that's less than peanuts, right? Psh, nothing." But I challenge people, go to those factories, talk to those women and young men and youth in those factories, and they will tell you that it is valuable. They will tell you that what is happening in their lives has been impacted by that. And that's the power of trade. That's what trade is. People who are in factories all across Africa, all across the world, really. That's how the US developed. And they are producing these products, adding value to them, and shipping them out uh, to the rest of the world. And I say to people, if Africa actually captured only, I go back to that book I read, if it only captured, you know, let's say it has 1% of all garments that ship to the US now as 1% of the US market. It's very tiny. If they got to 3% or 4%, do you know what that would do in Africa? Because I've seen the factories with 8,000 people working in it. So, you know, just you multiply this over and over. Just to capture 3 or 4% of the US market in that one value chain. Imagine what would happen if the DRC and Zambia could, instead of shipping their lithium and cobalt raw, and in this case, it goes to China. I'm not a China basher, but that's a reality. Goes to China, it's processed there. And that's where all the EV batteries come from and other batteries, not just for electric vehicles. What if we invested in processing lithium and cobalt right there on the continent? What would happen? How could that impact not just the DRC and Zambia, but the whole continent? And now that they have this African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, they're able to ship products all across the continent. It is the largest free trade market that has been developed since the World Trade Organization. So it is important. And this is a great time and a great opportunity for US companies. Other companies can go too, but I'm focused on the US ones. US companies to look at Africa as one enormous market, as I said, 1.3 billion people, $3.4 trillion combined GDP, and invest in manufacturing in Africa. And what is another reason that we should do that? And I'll wrap up. Another reason we should do that is we want supply chain diversification. When we saw what happened during COVID, where there were only a few plants in a few countries that make semiconductors. And, you know, there were factories in the US and Canada that had to shut down their auto lines because they couldn't get any semiconductor chips. Why not diversify your supply chains and use Africa as the place that you do that? They're ready for it. They've got educated people. They've got land, something like 60% of the world's arable land that is still waiting to be used is in Africa. But why not invest into those countries, shift your production from some of the other places, and you would have countries who can ship their products to the US and to Europe and other places duty free, and it makes sense to do it. And so if I were a businesswoman, I run a nonprofit organization of businesses. But if I were a businesswoman, that's what I would do. I would invest in manufacturing in Africa. There's so many different sectors you could pick from, just, anything. And so, I think that this is the way we need to go. I commend the kinds of programs that um, the Biden administration and previous administrations have done, where they focus on promoting the economic relationship between the United States and Africa, where they continue to give aid. To go back to my first point, when it's needed, humanitarian assistance is still very important and probably will always be very important. But to shift that relationship and the lens that we have for Africa from people who are just, a continent that is just sort of sitting there in some horrible condition, waiting for you to give them a hand out, right? Why not see them through the lens that so many of us, I hope many of you have had the chance to see these countries are some of the fastest growing in the world. They have leadership. Yes, there's some leadership that's not right. I will not tell you that. Yes, there are a few conflicts here and there. That's true too. But Africa, I tell people when folks say to me, oh, invest in Africa, I'm not sure. I'll say, well, which country are you thinking of? Which I said it's 54 countries in Africa, it's a continent. It's not one country. I said, tell me where you're worried about. And then you notice people like, well, I don't know. I'm like, I think you country by country, see what they have to offer. They all have something to offer. Some have more, I'll be honest, some have less. But every African country I've gone to, and I think I've now visited maybe 42 out of the 54. I'm still hoping that that's my bucket list, that I'll make it to every African country at some point. Never been to Somalia. I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna get to Somalia. Never been to Eritrea, you know. But I've been to some countries where they're now on the bad boy list: Niger, Gabon, Burkina Faso. You know, I bet they're on the bad boy list right now. But Ethiopia. I've been to all of those countries. They all have something to offer, and my hope and for them, and also for us in the United States, that we will realize what Africa has to offer us, what Africa has to offer to the world. And I think, in honor of David and the vision that he had, I hope that many of you, as you move out from this program and have the opportunity to work in all sorts of places, companies, corporates, World Bank, UN, journalist, I mean, whatever area you have the opportunity to work in, that you will be messengers, carry David's vision and dream forward about what Africa is and what it can mean for all of us. Thank you.
Flori, thank you so much. I have been listening to Flori for many, many years, and I always learn something, and I always come away more optimistic and energized. I also wanted to echo Dinair's welcome. This is always such a fun event. It's always so lovely to see David's family and friends. It's spring, it's a time of renewal, the semester's coming to an end, and it's always a really happy occasion. So thank you for being here, and thank you all for joining. Flori, this is a very busy week for you. Very busy year, actually. And you talked about the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which many kind of call that cornerstone of the U.S.-Africa trade relationship that allows African countries to export goods duty-free into the United States. It's up for renewal. And there's debates around its renewal. It is a one-way program, so African countries export duty-free, but we don't get any we don't get any preferential treatment. For example, there's questions about the eligibility of countries. You talked about the bad boys list and people or governments who not aligned get struck off. I wonder if you can talk about some of those debates and kind of what you make of them. Because there's very legitimate arguments on either side. I'm curious to know kind of what you think and kind of how you see this next phase of AGOA.
Well, so, there are people who say, oh, there should be no eligibility requirements at all for AGOA. And I'm not in that camp. I'm not in that camp because I do believe, from what I've heard from the Africans themselves, that it helps them. It gives them sort of benchmarks that they have to strive for. And as they have shared with me quietly, if they can blame it on somebody else, if there are reforms that they have to make, that they can say, well, actually, we're putting in this new law that allows for this thing we haven't allowed in the past, or we are opening up our market. We had a pretty closed market before. That's one of the criteria, having an open market economy. Or, one of the eligibility requirements is that you're taking actions to reduce poverty in your country. And they're also the ones that have to do with good governance, anti-corruption, et cetera. So I think that having the eligibility requirements is good. What I have more trouble with now is that AGOA gets used as the only tool that if a country doesn't do something the way we think they should, you're out of AGOA. What are our other tools and options and programs that we can look at that can be used to encourage and incentivize those countries to do the right thing? And so I've been pushing not for getting rid of the eligibility criteria, not for lessening the criteria, but more for if a country has a coup, okay, typically you have a coup, you're out. But is there something else that we can do vis-a-vis a country that's had a coup and not shut down the factories that are, putting, women out of work? And, Madagascar has had, I call them serial coups. It's like they have a coup and then good governance comes back, and about 3 years later, then there's another coup. And I remember being there, one of my trips there, and they had a petition that all these women that worked in those factories had signed, begging not to put them out of AGOA. And the US put them out of AGOA. And then their orders dropped, of course, right? If you have to pay duties on something you were getting duty free, then your product is not as competitive in the US market and they can go somewhere else and buy it. And so I felt bad, all those women, it was mostly women, they're men too, but mostly women who ended up losing jobs, factories closing, but then, AGOA would come back. But each time that has happened in Madagascar, not as many jobs come back and not as many orders come back because it's just too unstable. And people are trying to have stable markets, stable folks they can source from. They're not interested in and out, in and out. So, that's one part of the AGOA discussion. I think that, or another one that people are saying now, well, we should do something on ICT and critical minerals. I agree. How can we promote more ICT between, trade and, communications and technology and digital? How can we do that? AGOA is really for products. It's a tariff bill. And critical minerals can already come into this country from Africa duty free. That's not the problem they have. The problem they have is the one I mentioned before, which is the processing is all happening in other places. So I would just say I think AGOA should be renewed. I think it should be renewed sooner rather than later. The orders are already dropping, even though it doesn't end until September 30th or 2025 next year. Usually 18 months before AGOA ends, the orders start going down. Why? No certainty. Companies don't know. If you're ordering for next year's clothing and you're doing that now, and you're going like, I don't know whether it's going to be coming duty free or not. So I think it should be renewed now. There's a coalition of us who believe it should be renewed quickly. We've been going up to the Hill. I just met with 13 members of the House Ways and Means Committee. They're the ones that decide on to go on the House side. I was just called a few days ago and asked if I would testify at a Senate finance hearing that's going to be happening in early June. I said, I'd love to. So we're encouraging them to do that. And we're also talking to the administration to please take a position, the White House to take a position and push the Hill, right? Work with the Hill, because, you know, it also takes the executive branch, right? And to go up there, because I know I did it. For many years, we go up, we talk to people, and we try to get them to, you know, move forward on AGOA renewal. It's important. This is the best time to renew it. It links to the AFCFTA, the continental market, and I just don't see any reason why we shouldn't. And there are countries, I'll just say one other thing. There are countries that people talk about, well, you know, what about graduation? And what about countries where we want to have a reciprocal relationship with them? And I would just point, we're working now with Kenya. It was a foreign trade, you know, an FTA, a free trade agreement. It's now, they call it the US-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, STIP, whatever that is, right? But it includes a lot of things that are in a free trade agreement. And now they just have to put the market access in. And I've been told that it will come, they'll do that. So yes, I think we should renew AGOA, but I want to end on this one question of saying, but it should not be the only thing we do. We should look at an AGOA plus strategy. What else can we do with Africans that would promote their economic growth as well as our own?
Well, just on that, what are some of those things? You know, in the time since AGOA, you know, there's been Prosper Africa, there's been, you know, the Exim Bank has kind of taken on a bigger Africa portfolio. You have the Development Finance Corporation.
Doing a lot of things, yeah.
Kind of what is it that you want in addition, or you would advise in addition?
So all of those programs you just mentioned are wonderful. They are supporting more trade and investment between the US and Africa. They're supporting, you know, we've seen some really great deals. One of our companies is doing a solar project in Angola. We have the president of Angola coming to our summit next week. And Exim Bank is providing 900 million of the financing for that solar project in Angola. So, you know, all those things are important. A trade agreement, though, is a little different because it's talking about sort of the two ways. So we do benefit from our investments in Africa. It does benefit us. If you're exporting products to Africa, your solar panels, you're doing pretty good things for yourself, right? Of course, it benefits the Angolans as well. So you don't need a trade agreement to do that. You need investment, and you need joint venture partnerships supported by international financial institutions. It can be a US one, or it can be, you know, from other countries around the world. Some of our members of CCA get funding from Canada or from the UK for their projects in Africa. But, you know, what more you would want, I think, has to be, what is the next stage of your relationship with the Africans in the trade area? What do you want to do with them? And someone said to me, and I think it's probably fair to say, that under this administration, and, you know, again, I'm not bashing anyone, but we have not been pursuing free trade agreements with anybody, right? So it's not personal to Africa that they're not pursuing free trade agreements with Africans. It's that this particular administration has been focused on some other things that they're trying to do in the trade space. And I think that those things are useful. I think, you know, programs through Prosper Africa and so forth, these are all useful. But I think the next phase will be, can we get to a free trade agreement with the Kenyans? and with their East African community? Can we get to a trade agreement with South Africa and the Southern Africa Customs Union? Can we do something in West Africa with the ECOWAS countries? Maybe Ghana can be the anchor. I think of that. I think of like regional agreements that we do so that they stay together for themselves. We're not breaking them up, right? But they stay together for themselves, and we're supporting that by having a trade agreement with a group of them. And maybe there's one country in that group that's the strongest of them, Kenya in East Africa, maybe, or South Africa in the southern, again, it could be Ghana in the West Africa, or Nigeria. So that's what I envision. And then it would all, come together, but we would not force countries that are small and really don't want, more reciprocal agreements to do that. I don't think we should force them. I think we should offer it, and we should make it attractive.
You spend a lot of time traveling in Africa and talking, and the summit next week. And I'm wondering kind of what you hear most, kind of what are the top things that Africans want from the United States in this arena?
Investment. Remember, I was talking about used to be aid, and then we said no more aid, or let's move from aid to trade. Now, when you talk to Africans, it's investment. They're very clear that they want US investment. They want US companies to come partner with companies on the ground and invest in manufacturing in Africa. And they feel like they're ready. They're like, bring your FDI, your foreign direct investment here. And what I say to them is, people can take their dollars, Deutsche Mark, and maybe, name it, to anywhere in the world, and you have to make it attractive for them to come to your country. Not just, there are other countries in Africa they can pick. There are 54 of them, right? So you want them to come to your country, right, in West Africa. You want to be the hub for what happens. Certain things you have to do, certain policies you have to put in place. You have to have what we call an enabling environment. And, from the US side, our companies say they need stability. They don't want it one way this year and next way, they need stability, predictability. They want to know that if they want to get their money out, right? You've invested, you want to get your money out, that you can get your money out. They want to know if there is a commercial disagreement, that they can go to your courts in Africa and have quick resolution. And so we tell them that, and we're strong advocates. We beat the drum here for US companies to look at Africa and invest, but we beat the drum on the continent for them to do the things that would attract that investment, keep that investment, grow that investment, because it's a two-way street. And I think that, people are hearing on both sides. More and more US companies are going to Africa, investing in Africa in new sectors. Some of our more recent members like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they're all there. We have some companies though, Procter & Gamble, they've been there 50, 60 years. Caterpillar, been there 50, 60 years. So we want to see new areas of investment, sports as a business. That's important. Creative arts and creative economies, movie content for Netflix and Amazon Prime and those kind of things. They're going to Africa now. I don't know about all of you all, but I've been seeing some shows over here that I really like. This all content. I love it, right? So I think that's the kind of thing. That's an investment also, right? It's not a thing, but it's an investment. You go there, you work with the writers and the creative, the folks on the ground there.
Music folks.
The music, how could I forget that? The music industry.
Taking over the music
Yes,
world.
the whole thing, right? And that's also investment, investing in that. And so like I said, we're at both sides. We're saying to the Africans, make it easy for people to come and invest. And we're saying on this side, go and invest.
What are some of the places you're excited about? Who's kind of getting it right in this domain, would you say? What's the hot?
Yeah, I mean, so I always get in trouble if I start talking about,
That's not a fair question right before your summit.
what I like, right, not right before the summit. But what I like are countries that are sort of off of people's radars. They don't, Namibia, small country in Southwest Africa, doing a lot of the right things. I think they were one of the first ones I heard about a couple of years ago, a green bond. I was like, what's a green bond, right? They're doing, I think, a lot of the right things in terms of attracting investment. Botswana, where we had our summit last year, very small country. I've gotten to know President Masisi, and he's really brave. If I can just share a story, they have diamonds, and Botswana is one of the few countries in Africa that, when, of course, now they're a very small economy, right? But when they discovered their diamonds, and it was De Beers that's been there for many years, and they decided they would invest in infrastructure. Their roads are excellent. They're, just every child in Botswana gets a free education all the way through college. They're investing in their people, they're investing in whatever. But when De Beers contract with Botswana was up for renegotiation about 4 or 5 years ago, and the De Beers folks wanted to do it the same way they'd always done it, which is, we take your diamonds and we send it to India for cutting and polishing. Okay. And then it goes from India. And then I think, Brussels, there's a whole, in Antwerp, and there's this whole thing. And then, many of our diamonds in this country are sourced from Botswana, but we would not know it, right? So President Masisi wants to have a very different kind of contract with De Beers going forward. And when you've done something the same way for 30, 40 years, and you've made good money doing it that way, you might figure, well, it's not broke, don't fix it. But he had a different idea. And he was very clear that, no, we can't cut and polish everything. We can't cut and polish all the diamonds. He knows that. They don't have the skill sets. There's a whole industry that goes with that. And believe me, the Indians know it, right? But he was saying, okay, a certain percentage of our diamonds needs to stay here, and you all need to invest in us being able to do more of the cutting and polishing. This is the whole value addition and beneficiation I was talking about before. You need to do more of that here. And there were other pieces of the contract that he wanted changed. And at one point, and I think this story is known amongst, it's been out there, the folks said, no, we are not going to do that. They said, we'll just walk away from the table. And I thought they're very brave. Well, fine, but the diamonds are here. The diamonds that you want are here in my country. So when you need to sit back down and talk, come back. And for about a year, the talk ceased. But he held fast, and guess what? The diamonds were still there, and they came back. So I think those are the kinds of small countries like Botswana. You asking me, I think that's great that you have, it's a tiny country. I think they have like now 1.9 million. But they're doing the right things.
Like setting the terms.
They're setting the terms. And they're not just doing it for the, how can you put this? For the enrichment, I'm just going to say it. They're not just doing it for the enrichment of a few people here and there. Because I think that's the other thing that we've seen on the continent, that when there are resources that come into the country from their wealth, the wealth of what's in their ground and all of that. And then you have people who have become very, very rich, but it's just a tiny swath of people. And that's why any countries I see where I see they have a strong development plan, that they're investing in education and, tech training, things like that. And there are issues with Rwanda. I know, folks have some issues with the leadership, but I also think that the way that President Kagame has invested in the people there, that was one of the first countries I went to more than a decade ago, where the kids used to be at the airports and we didn't understand why. And they would flock to the airport because that's where Wi-Fi was. They could get Wi-Fi there. And one of the things they did, one of the first places I started seeing like Wi-Fi cafes was in Kigali, right? Where kids could come and they could actually have access to Wi-Fi staying in the city. That was, the leadership saw that and said, let's make sure that the kids are not all going out to the airport. That's not safe. Let's try to do stuff for them in the city. So small countries doing the right things, moving in the right direction. And then there are big countries too. I'm hoping that Nigeria gets some things right with their foreign exchange issues. They need the investment, not just in oil. They need the investment. And so, I, I think there's like, we have to see what the new leadership will do. But we have the vice president of Nigeria coming next week. So, we're hopeful for them. President of Liberia is coming. President of Angola is coming. President of Cabo Verde. I don't know if any of you have been to Cape Verde. I love Cabo Verde. And the Prime Minister of Mauritius. Mauritius is beautiful. Oh my goodness. So yeah, so I could just all across the continent, I can think of countries that are incredible. And South Africa, despite all the issues that they have at the moment, many, many issues. But it's a country that reminds me of all the African countries. It actually reminds me most of the US in some ways. It is multiracial and multicultural. It's a huge country. If you go from one part of South Africa to the other, totally different uh, weather, you know, and that, like, there's something about that that reminds me. You also see a lot of multiracial couples there. Um, I have friends who are retiring from the US in South Africa. But there are still a lot of issues there right now that have to be addressed. There really are. So, and you can't gloss over that. But I wouldn't like throw the baby out the bathwater.
Stay hopeful. I would love to take some questions from all of you. And we'll start over here with the gentleman in the front.
Please wait till I bring the microphone to you.
If you could introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Todd Wiggins. It's a pleasure to hear this presentation. I wanted to ask you about something that's probably hasn't been discussed in quite a while, but nuclear power and nuclear weapons. My understanding is that some time ago, South Africa had an option of involving themselves with the nuclear power or nuclear weapons. Do you think that that should be a factor in future? Because now that North Korea has got nuclear weapons, it seems like the industrialized nations, although the wealthy, have some involvement in weaponry. And is it by design that there are no African countries that are aggressively involved in that, or should that just be taken off the table completely?
Wow. Well, I am definitely not an expert on nuclear weapons. I thought you were going to go with sort of where it creates energy for us, and that, yeah, right. That I think is a part of manufacturing. If it can be, a part of a diverse energy platform in the country, you still need some fossil fuels. Don't throw anything at me. Sorry. You still need oil and gas in some places. It's still needed. Been here in the U.S., right? Then solar, and then nuclear. I think that like a robust package of different energy options on South Africa and developing that. South Africa now can't even keep the lights on all the time. Okay, I hate to. One of my most recent trips there, you know, you get to a street corner and there's no lights and there's traffic all going. I'm saying, like, how you get across, you know? And somebody said, "Oh, yeah, if can I help you get across?" Yes, please. But you know, I used to fly in South African Airways, loved it. Not flying international. They have more critical, in my opinion, you asked. In my opinion, they need to focus on, you know, getting the energy picture right there so that people don't have to have these scheduled brownouts and blackouts. They need to fix their ports. You know, they need to focus on, you know, getting South African Airways up and flying again. I mean, they have so many things, and politically, they have some other challenges as well. But I'm not an expert on like the nuclear, like weapons thing at all. I don't know that field at all, so I can't speak.
Let's we'll stay over there in the.
Okay, I had
Okay,
something first and then
Okay, then we'll go there, and then we'll come to the center. And then.
Thank you for being here. I used to live in South Africa's Cape Town. I'm Jordan Jefferson. My question for you is, America is all about interests with investment and foreign affairs. More in depth about my question is regarding for Congress to pass or increase from 2% to 4%. Is there a continental coalition regarding comparative advantage or trade to make America want to be more interested down the line?
I think the answer to that question is that every sector is different, and it's not America investing in Africa. It is your company that is in the shea butter industry, finding a partner on the ground in Ghana or Nigeria that has shea, and you getting a loan from the Small Business Administration or the Export-Import Bank so that you can basically work with your counterpart on the ground in Nigeria. That's trade. And so it doesn't happen at, I think, the 10,000-foot level. That's the framework that gets put in by governments. The governments are responsible for putting in the framework and the enabling environment. It's the individuals who run the companies and the businesses and enterprises, and especially SMEs. You know, people kind of blow them off, but in this country, the majority of job creation happens from small businesses that have 50 or fewer people. People don't know that. So I think that, you know, establishing a business, and I have met young entrepreneurs both on this side and on the other side. They're incredible. They are the ones that are driving trade. And this is also why I tell people, don't dismiss this company that sends one container a month or something, just because they're, you know, countries that can ship, you know, 1,000 containers a month. So what? So what? But that's my response on that, that it's not the US that can decide that there's going to be an increase from 2% to 4%. It actually happens because they're businesses who decide that they want to invest in a country. And look, and this is not, I say this all the time. We have lots of folks who are in Africa who are doing good, but I'm interested in the folks who are in Africa because they're doing well. You know what I'm saying? It's a business, it's a bottom line, right? And we want to encourage businesses to look at Africa and to, you know, invest, trade. But it happens, you know, individual levels, and every sector is different. If you wanted to be in footwear, it would be very different than if you decided you wanted to be in the shea butter industry. Right. So, and I just have to acknowledge someone who's a student here who also is an intern at CCA. So Matt, thank you, and thank you for your input to my remarks tonight. Thank you so
Oh,
much. I
excellent.
appreciate
He's
it.
about to ask a question too. Okay, so we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to take both of your questions at once. So keep it brief.
Hi.
Okay.
We'll take 2 or 3 at a time.
Yes. These two right here.
Oh yeah, hi. My name's Charlie Ralph, and I was gonna ask basically, how can we prevent brain drain in from Africa to the United States essentially, or like west, like to the west?
I was gonna, hello, nice to be here. So I was gonna add a little bit similar to Charlie's question. How can we make sure that small business enterprises that which you mentioned before, get the adequate support they need to develop intelligence and to prevent brain drain and to maintain and to improve their technological expertise in Africa?
One more and then I'll, oh, no, no, I'm fine to take more questions, but I was saying just in this batch, we can take a third question.
Hi, I'm Cindy.
Would argue, okay, well, then what about those people whose jobs are like in the US or other countries that if you invest in Africa, then their jobs are in danger? What would you say?
Wow. That's a very good question because that's about perceptions of what trade does and doesn't do. So let me answer the other questions first. On brain drain, one of the things I think that's wonderful that's happening is there are Africans who are returning home. And they are doing it, they are diaspora Africans who are going back. And what's happening is that some governments are offering incentives of sorts. They're providing loans if you will invest in certain sectors. Ethiopia is very clear. If you're Ethiopian American, you can come back to Ethiopia, but they're trying to, you know, they're trying to show you where they need you the most. Ghana has done an incredible job in welcoming back. They give citizenship to Americans and Canadians, and you know, you can be just a plain old African American, and you know, and come and have citizenship in Ghana. So you know, that's a part of what's happening. But the real reason for brain drain is the same reason that we have the issue with the southern border. If your lifestyle, if your quality of life is not going to be a good quality of life, then you are going to think about where else can I go that's going to give me the quality of life that I would like. So to me, the best way to prevent brain in Africa is to help African countries develop the countries and provide the kind of lifestyle that people need and want. More nurses in Ghana that work in the UK, the United States, and Canada than there are Ghanaian nurses in Ghana. Right? But I don't blame them. You know, people are like, why don't you go back home? You should be here. Because here, they can have a different lifestyle. And they're entitled to that. I'm an immigrant to this country. I was born in Panama. My family immigrated to the United States when I was 2. We lived in Brooklyn, lived with a family, you know, relatives until we can get on our own feet. And then I think I was probably 17 before we lived just us in my family, the typical immigrant type of, right? I mean, that's what happens in immigrant families. But why did we come to the US? Because Colon, which is where I was born in Panama, not on the canal, right? But in Colon, which is the poorest part of Panama, was then and still is today, right? And my parents thought we will have a better life and more opportunities for our children in the United States, and we're going to do whatever we can to get to the United States. And they did. So that's the way that we can address brain drain. On your question of jobs lost here because they've gone somewhere else. It's a good question, but that's not exactly how trade works. Jobs shift in and out of countries. There was a time where we made clothing here. That shifted out of the US. We used to make leather footwear. That shifted out of the US. Other countries in the world can now produce those products more competitively. And we have then the choices of buying shoes from made in Brazil and China and Korea and Ethiopia. I've been to shoe factories in Ethiopia, et cetera. Now, when the people who worked in the shoe factories, they had skills, but now maybe they're working in a factory that's making semiconductors, right? Because they gained certain skills working on the machines that were putting together the footwear or so, and they're better paying jobs. So I don't think we want to force companies to continue employing Americans in jobs that pay less money, are less skilled, and don't produce the products that we need as competitively as some other countries. And so, my view is that we will continue to benefit. We still have industries that are incredible in the United States, and we still have people who have jobs that are higher up the value chain. And I'll say one more thing about that. That's what's happening in China. There are jobs in China that are shifting out of China to other places in the world, including Africa, because people now want to make products that are further up the value chain. They want to keep making the things they were making before. So is that bad for China or good for Africa? I think it's actually good for all the countries. It's an interconnected world. And so that's how trade works.
What do you think?
You take some two.
One over here and one here, and then.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, I agree with you 100% about manufacturing higher order products. But the big unpleasant reality right now is that there is an enormous debt burden in Africa. And what that means is that if you want to construct pay for the kind of things that are going to make a manufacturing transition possible, infrastructure, education, higher value, you need to kind of, you need capital. And you have some countries that are defaulting, can't get new capital, others that are having to choose between paying back or doing away with education, not spending money on health. And that is the reality on the ground right now, which is exceedingly hard to overcome. I think it's like $80 billion that Africa is going to be paying in debt servicing this year. And so, if you're going to move forward now, William Ruto is going to be here next month, and Adesina, the head of the African Development Bank, have actually proposed a decade-long pause in the African debt so that African internally generated money in Africa can be used to develop Africa. And that's out there. And the discussion, I know the IMF and World Bank people are buzzing about that. But I'm just interested in your thoughts about that and how possible it is to actually drive that agenda, because I think it becomes very, very important if there's going to be the kind of development you talk about.
And then we have a question, and I'd be happy to answer both of those.
I'm in complete agreement with your thinking that rather than having American companies telling African countries, American business telling African countries what they need to do, I agree with you. You're not going to have issues around the brain drain, et cetera, if you work on an equal footing. Issues that we see today, for example, are problematic, some of them because of how the results of NAFTA, both Republican and Democratic parties. And a lot of folks are very dissatisfied with what they see has been the problems with free trade agreements like NAFTA. But that does not have to be the end result. If these agreements are countries and companies go at it on an equal, trying to do it on an equal footing. I also agree with you that SMEs are where real jobs and the productivity really takes place. A lot of the debt we're talking about relative to Africa, some of that obviously happens with a lot of countries. And I think what we saw in Africa to a very real degree was a lot of leaders and deals being done that didn't necessarily benefit the countries per se. On the energy side, I work for a firm that we do a lot of renewable energy. Some of the things that you're talking about will be fundamental to making sure the lights stay on for 8 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours rather than 4 hours a day. I think you need, what has to happen is those having good grid systems, substations, et cetera, which will allow people to read, become educated, et cetera. That's all part of the mix that you so adequately described.
I'm gonna have to,
And I think I'm glad that you're taking the position that it's not just a one size fits all in each country that you're dealing with will have its own unique set of economic and political issues. Thank you.
my time management skills have been terrible. We'll take
We'll
one
take
more
you over
and-
here
and
'cause we
then a
didn't have very
quick,
many
quick,
women.
quick, kind of overview response, because those were comments in a way.
And you're a student too.
Oh.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I am. So hi, my name is Chanel Jim. I'm a student here in the Elliott School. I'm also here on behalf of GW's African Development Initiative. So I just want to, okay, I will make it short. But I want to touch upon something that you mentioned earlier concerning young people working in these factories. And I want to ask if there are any ethical concerns when it comes to increasing these factories. You know, I think about the DRC a lot and how around 40% of the people who work in those in the cobalt like mining are children. And so I just want to ask if there are any ethical concerns when it comes to increasing factories within the continent and that debate when it comes to having greater focus on investing in human capital like education and health.
Yeah.
I think on debt, just if everybody just thinks about it, there's good debt and then there's bad debt. All of us have some level of debt of some kind. People decide they buy a home, that's debt. And 30-year debt. And, you look at, can you get a good rate, a bad rate, et cetera. The Africans have had cycles of doing, and different countries have had different experiences. Zambia probably went too far. And then, they had the issues that they've had. They're not the only ones. But some African countries have managed their debt well. They've, gone into debt for things that are worthwhile being in debt for. And they've done it with the right people or the right countries, and they've done it with the right terms. And I think that there's been talk of, for example, not just a moratorium, but using SDRs, for example, from the World Bank.
Special drawing rights.
I'm sorry, special drawing rights that the rich countries who have them could potentially shift some of those SDRs to countries who are in debt and allow them to use that to not pay off the debt, because the US will never give SDRs to Africans to pay back the Chinese loans that they have, but maybe to use those SDRs to invest in health, education, and other things. But I agree, there are some countries that have walked all the way to the line, need to do some things differently. But I think some countries in Africa that do have debt, but it's good debt. And they've managed it right. They have the right partners. And so it's not like one big, like all Africans are in debt. And some have a lot of debt to the Chinese, others don't. So it kind of depends on what kind of debt, I would say. I think on the question, the guy was there. I don't know that I agree that, I know NAFTA has had issues for sure. But again, Mexico and Canada are the US's two largest trading partners, and they are our neighbors. And that relationship to be able to foster trade and economic development across those three countries, I think has been helped by the trade agreement they have, including the newest one, because it's no longer called NAFTA. What's it called again, Jennifer? Thank you, MCA. Thank you. So, again, I would not propose that all FTAs, with African countries would necessarily, there may be some negative things that happen. There might be a need for trade adjustment assistance, but I think that on the whole, free trade agreements are good things on the whole, on the whole. And in response to, you know, the young lady here being worried about what happens in those factories, we absolutely have to be worried about it. And US companies that are producing and manufacturing in countries outside of the US, I don't care where it is. It could be in Indonesia, it could be in Vietnam, it could be in, you know, Ghana, South Africa, wherever. They absolutely have to make sure that they meet the labor standards, not just like the local labor standards. They have to meet the labor standards of the International Labor Organization. You can't be in those countries and thinking that you're just going to do horrible things to the environment and the people and ship your products to the US. And most US consumers now are sensitive about those kind of things. They don't want you shipping them stuff from, what do they call them, hot factories? Yeah, right. Sweatshops and all of that. And I have been in many factories in Africa. Now, you were talking about mining, that's different. I haven't been in mines, okay? But even there are different uh, global standards and tracing of what comes from the mines and trying to shut down some of the artisanal mines you're talking about, which, you know, people have children working in. But the major global companies that are mining, they can't do that. They can't do that. They'd be out of business, right? So yes, we all have to be concerned. And if we see those kinds of things going on, we should, you know, take whatever actions we need to take. But I do have to just share this one quick thing. When I was in a country one time, I probably shouldn't mention the name of the country, and we went in a factory and we were looking at some folks who were making furniture that they were shipping to the US under AGOA. And the first thing that struck most of us was, I think there are kids in here under 18. I was like, oh boy. I was like, so, you know, we told the folks who had come in and, you know, this is going to be a big, you know, wonderful event. And I said, let's pause here for a moment. Because I said, I think we have children working in this factory. And of course, there was some equipment and things. And so we stopped everything. And then we decided we were not going to make that a gold success story for that day. But we then had, I will never forget this, we then had a round table with the owner of the company, some of the people from USAID who were there. And they said in this conversation, which I will never forget, in the US, on your farms, when you have a farm, a family farm that's working, you have kids who are 12 and 13 driving tractors. They're out there doing whatever, milking the cows, making sure that, you know, the chickens get fed and the this and the that. And so long as they're going to school, nobody thinks they're committing a crime. So how do you come over here to Africa and we think it's fine for our kids to, you know, help us with picking whatever the saba or, you know, this is my son, I'm teaching him how to make furniture. And, you know, how do you all come over here and tell us that we're all wrong and we got poor labor practices when you have a whole country that was built on farmers who had kids out there doing all of that? And I remember I thought, okay. And I remember looking at the other people from the US government and I said, I don't have an answer. Anybody got an answer? I didn't have an answer to that. Now, I imagine that people who are professionals on the labor standards of the United States actually do have answers on this. But to this day, I bet you, if you go out to some of the farms, my brother went to school in South Dakota, you didn't see anything but, you know, corn for miles and miles. And, you know, I bet you to this day, below the age of 18, who are working and, you know, I mean, seriously working, but apparently that's acceptable. And, You know, now I am not saying that a child with dangerous instruments in a factory, you know, making furniture, I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there is something a little off about that, especially when you look at the United States and who we are and how we developed our farming industry in this country. So I, I, I never had an answer. If somebody else has an answer on that, I'm okay, but I never had an answer on that. Yeah.
We are at time. Listen, I always love listening to Flory. She kind of challenges the easy answers and the easy assumptions. It's really great. And no easy narratives about Africa. No, that's why
But we love it anyway.
we do love it. It's but there's no one story and one way of looking at these issues. So Flory, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.